Around the World Lit Audio. Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Part 3. Week 6. Chapters 4 to 6. Full narration script. Channel intro. Welcome to Around the World Lit Audio, the greatest novels ever written, from every corner of the world, in English. New chapter every week. Free to listen. Chapter recap. In week 5, Raskolnikov's mother and sister arrived in St. Petersburg. He crashed Lizin's visit and told him directly that he wanted a wife who owed him everything. Dunya sent Lizin away with complete composure. Then Porfiry summoned Raskolnikov for a second meeting, more settled, more specific this time. Porfiry asked about a particular day. He talked about fevers and unreliable timelines. And he looked at Raskolnikov with his light, clever eyes and said, "I think the person who did this is not going to run. Don't you think that is probably right?" Part 3. Chapters 4 through 6. Part 3. Chapter 4. The second visit to Sonya. He went back to Sonya. He had been thinking about her, since their first meeting, about her faith, about her capacity to function with the weight of what she carried, about the specific question of how a person continues after they have done the thing that cannot be undone. He had not understood her answer the first time. He needed to understand it now, with the urgency of a man for whom understanding had become a matter of survival rather than curiosity. He found her in her small room. She received him again with the same nervous courtesy, though there was something different now, a recognition, perhaps, that this visit was not casual, that something specific was being asked of her even though nothing specific had yet been said. He sat across from her. He said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." She said, "I will." He said, "What would you do if you knew someone had killed two people? Would you tell them to go to the police? Would you tell them to confess?" She looked at him. The question hung in the room with the particular weight of a question that is not entirely hypothetical, and she understood this, understood it with the specific intelligence of a person who has spent considerable time reading the actual content of what people say beneath the surface of what they appear to be saying. She said, quietly, "Rodion Romanovich, what have you done?" He told her, not immediately, not in a single confession, but in stages, circling the admission the way he had circled it in his own mind for months, approaching and approaching again until the full shape of it was visible, and could not be denied. He told her about the pawnbroker, about Lizaveta, whom Sonya had known, whom Sonya had liked, a detail that made the confession considerably worse than it would otherwise have been. He told her about the theory, the extraordinary man, the right to transgress, the arithmetic of one useless life against the good that could be done with her money. He told her he had not used the money. It was hidden under a stone. He had not become Napoleon. He had become someone who could not feel anything except the specific quality of wrongness, that had no name. Sonya listened to all of this with an expression that moved through several states, shock, grief, and finally something that Raskolnikov had not expected, which was a kind of fierce protective tenderness. The tenderness of someone who has just learned that a person they care about is in terrible danger and has decided, immediately and without deliberation, to stand beside them in it. She did not recoil from him. This surprised him more than anything else in the conversation. He had expected horror. He had expected her to send him away, to call for help, to do any of the things that a reasonable person might do upon learning that the man in front of them had committed a double murder. Instead she said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I don't know." She said, "You have to confess. You have to go to the authorities and tell them everything." He said, "Why? What good would that do?" She said, "Because you cannot live like this. I can see what it has done to you already. It will destroy you slowly if you do not face it directly." He said, "And if I confess, what happens to me?" "Siberia, hard labor, the end of everything I might have become." She said, "You have already lost everything you might have become. The theory took that from you, the moment you acted on it. What remains is the question of whether you will also lose your soul, which is still possible to save, or whether you will let the guilt finish what the theory started." He looked at her. He said, "You would go to Siberia with me if I confessed?" She said, "Yes." She said it without hesitation, with the same simple directness that had characterized everything she had said since he arrived. It was not a romantic statement, though it contained the seeds of something that would, eventually, become love. It was a statement of fact, about what she had already decided, based on a faith that did not require her to understand everything in order to act rightly. He left her room with something he had not had when he entered it, not resolution, not peace, but the specific knowledge that there was a person in the world who knew the worst thing about him, and had not turned away. Part 3. Chapter 5. Svidrigailov's offer. Svidrigailov sent for him again. The meeting took place in a tavern, a place Svidrigailov had chosen with the apparent intention of conducting their business somewhere public enough to seem casual, and private enough to seem confidential. The specific calibration of a man who has had a great deal of practice arranging delicate conversations. He was, as always, pleasant. His pleasantness had a quality that Raskolnikov found difficult to categorize, not false exactly, but operating according to a logic that excluded the ordinary moral categories most people use to organize their behavior. He seemed genuinely to enjoy conversation. He seemed genuinely uninterested in conventional judgment. He existed, as far as Raskolnikov could determine, in a moral register that had simply stopped applying the usual weights to the usual things. He talked about Dunya. He said he had loved her, still loved her, in the specific way that obsessive men love the things they cannot have and have therefore elevated beyond the ordinary category of desire, into something closer to devotion. He said his wife's death had been unfortunate, but had not been, strictly speaking, his fault, though he said this in a tone that left considerable room for doubt about what strictly speaking might be concealing. He offered Raskolnikov money, not as a bribe exactly. Svidrigailov was careful about the framing, presenting it as a gift, an act of generosity from a man who had more money than he needed to a family that could use it. He said it had nothing to do with anything Raskolnikov might have done. He said it was simply something he wanted to do. Raskolnikov refused. He refused not out of pride exactly, though pride was present, but out of the specific recognition that accepting anything from Svidrigailov would create an obligation he did not want to carry, a connection he did not want to deepen, in a relationship that already felt dangerous in ways he could not fully articulate. Svidrigailov accepted the refusal without apparent disappointment. He said, "You are very like your sister, principled. It is admirable, even when it is inconvenient." He said this with what seemed like genuine respect, which was, in its way, more unsettling than contempt would have been. Raskolnikov left the meeting with the specific unease of having spent time with someone whose intentions he could not fully read, and whose capacity for harm he could not fully assess. Svidrigailov was not, he understood, going to simply disappear. He was going to remain present, connected to the family through his unresolved feelings for Dunya, in ways that would require continued vigilance. Part 3, Chapter 6, The Noose Tightens. He returned to his room, and found a stranger waiting for him on the landing. The stranger was a tradesman, a simple man, the kind of person Raskolnikov would not ordinarily have noticed, except that this man looked at him with an expression that was entirely unlike the expressions of strangers who do not know anything about you. The man said nothing. He simply looked. Raskolnikov said, "What do you want?" The man said, "Murderer." He said it quietly, without drama, the way you state an established fact, and then he turned and walked away, leaving Raskolnikov on the landing with the specific horror of having been named by someone he did not know, in a context he could not explain, with a certainty that suggested knowledge rather than accusation. He went into his room. He sat on his sofa and tried to understand what had just happened. Who was the man? How did he know? Was it possible that the truth had somehow become known beyond the careful circle of suspicion that Porfiry had constructed, known to ordinary people on the street, known in a way that made his eventual exposure not a matter of investigation but simply a matter of time? He did not sleep that night. He lay on his sofa and felt the walls of his situation closing with the specific quality of a trap that has been built slowly, methodically, by multiple parties who may not even be coordinating, each contributing a piece to a structure that was approaching completion regardless of any single person's intent. Porfiry knew. Svidrigailov suspected something, in his own oblique way. Sonya knew everything, and now a stranger on the landing had named him with a certainty that admitted no possibility of error. He thought about Sonya's words, "You cannot live like this." He understood, for the first time with complete clarity, that she was right, not because the walls were closing, though they were, but because the thing inside him, that had been waiting to feel like Napoleon and had instead felt like nothing he could name, was not going to resolve itself through evasion. It required something else, something that the entire architecture of his theory had never accounted for, because his theory had never accounted for what it would actually feel like to be the man who had done what he had done. He had built an argument about extraordinary men. He had discovered that he was, simply, a man. Chapter Transition. You have reached the end of Part 3, Chapters 4 through 6 of Crime and Punishment, by Fyodor Dostoevsky. In the next episode, we begin Part 4. Raskolnikov makes a decision about Porfiry. Svidrigailov's intentions become clearer and more dangerous, and the question that has been building since the murder, what will Raskolnikov actually do, moves toward an answer that neither he nor the reader can avoid much longer. The next episode is available next week. Subscribe to Around the World Lit Audio so you never miss a chapter. A new episode arrives every week.